Dr. Atilla Kisla is the International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Centre. Dr. Kisla, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. So, Israel basically seems to be saying that our government is lying, that the facts on the ground are different to what our legal team said yesterday. I mean, is that an argument that can really work if you look at what we know is what's happening on the ground in Gaza?
I don't think, thanks so much for having me firstly, but I don't think that strategy will be very effective with the court. We have seen this kind of strategy and attempt to undermine and discredit the evidence that was submitted by South Africa at the previous oral hearing. And I think they were referring to specifically to the UN reports today, that the UN reports are not always credible and cannot always be trusted, and to the fact that Israel is actually providing humanitarian aid and has opened the border crossings. However, in this context, the UN reports and the reports we have from the UN entities are certainly on the more credible side. So I think it will be very difficult to discredit those kind of arguments.
I mean, they say, for example, that Israel has not shut down two of its main border crossings, Rafah and Kerem Shalom. I mean, that's a fact that should be pretty easy to determine one way or another. I mean, the UN would probably be able to tell you officially whether or not that's true.
Exactly. I think that's what the court will do. The court has the means to gather that information if it's not satisfied by a submission of the parties, and I'm sure that will be done, and it's an easy fact to determine, actually.
So, I mean, basically what Israel is saying is, you know, there's a sort of old thing in law that you've got to manage it on the facts and you've got to manage it on the law, and all they're doing is saying that our facts are incorrect. Is that really a strong basis? I mean, if you bring, as I understand our legal system, if someone brings a version, you have to bring another version. Do they bring other facts?
I don't think fighting this case is merely on your own set of facts will be sufficient now to also later on at the stage of the merits. So, like I said, I don't think that strategy will be very effective. However, they also made some points on the law, and those might be points that convince the court not to make provisional measures. We'll have to see how the court will decide coming next week, probably.
One of the comments we saw from their lawyer just a moment ago was the claim that, you know, they say we have an ulterior motive and that we want an ulterior motive for Hamas, that we're Hamas's ally. I mean, okay, that's a hugely problematic claim, but even if our government was an ally of Hamas, let's just for a moment accept that to be the case, would that matter? I would presume for the court, genocide is genocide. It doesn't matter if we're someone's friend or not. What matters is whether there's a genocide.
Exactly, and that has been a trend that's going throughout these proceedings, that Israel is very much focusing on the attacks by Hamas and the terrorist attacks by Hamas and the suffering of the Israeli citizens and the hostages. However, that doesn't they didn't, or today again, really speak to the alleged violations of international law and what they are doing in that regard. So they just like portraying themselves as a state that does everything within the confines of the international law, and we'll see how the court will have to decide on that.
What do you expect the court to do now? I mean, it seems significant that the judges decided to hear our oral arguments. I mean, does that give us any indication after watching the arguments what's going to happen?
So the court in its decision will be, I think, very careful. Firstly, the court will not do anything or make any statement or decision that actually will prejudice the merits of the case. It's something that was stated in the order of 28 March, where the court actually stated that the second order for provisional measures, the additional provisional measures, is actually without prejudice to any findings concerning Israel's compliance with the previous order. And that will be certainly a consideration of the court, so that the court doesn't give Israel the basis to argue that the court is acting in any prejudicial way. In terms of the cessation of hostilities, it remains to be seen how the court will decide. It's still very high arguable potential provisional measure to order the cessation of hostilities. However, we have during the last provisional order from 28 March, 6 judges in the form of 3 declarations have actually expressed that the ICJ, the court, should actually order a cessation of hostilities. So there seems to be, these declarations reflect usually the personal view of the judges, and we will have to see to what extent that will actually transform into the official order of the court.
If we see what's happening around the world and we take a sort of holistic view of it, right? If you look at the arguments that we presented yesterday, our government presented yesterday, you look at the arguments Israel presented today, it's almost as if people are making decisions based on 2 completely different sets of facts. To put that in a different way, it's almost as if 2 sets of people are living in 2 different worlds. And more, it seems to me, sitting here in Johannesburg, that more and more people around the world are coming around to sort of the argument that South Africa has been presenting. We see this in the United States, you know, Israel's strongest ally. More and more you see people there sort of pushing for the rights of Palestinians rather than the rights of Israelis. It's a very complicated process. You probably understand it better than I do. What I'm interested in is if Israel has a completely different understanding of the world and they're a signatory to this court, do you expect them to start pulling out of international organizations that try in some way and work towards international justice? I mean, that would sort of be the next step, wouldn't it? They're not going to do whatever the court orders them to do. They've already said that.
That's a key question. I think at this stage, one can only speculate how Israel would react in the future. However, I think even though we don't see a direct impact, maybe don't see a direct impact of these provisional measures, there's certainly an indirect impact. I mean, you spoke about the US, even the US, who is like the biggest supporter in terms of arms to Israel and aid to Israel, has actually voiced concerns about the situation in Gaza. So other Israeli allies have voiced concerns and have stopped their arms transfers or reduced them significantly. So these provisional measures and these oral hearings, I think they certainly help to shape the public opinion and the opinion of the international community. And you can see that at the example of all these states like Colombia, Egypt, expressing intent to join these proceedings. So more and more states are coming on board of this case to express their views and what kind of violations are occurring in Gaza.
There's also a test here for international law, and it's not the only test. You could argue that the situation in Ukraine, many other places, are tests for international law too. And we see the sort of trend around the world is to move away from a kind of legalistic regime, to move away from the rule of law, the rise of authoritarian governments. Are we living in an era where international law is being weakened?
I'm not sure where I would sign off on that statement. I think I accept the view that certainly states, different individual states have their own agenda sometimes to bring cases to a court, and one might not agree with that kind of agenda. However, I think at the end of the day, we need institutions like the ICC or the International Court of Justice, because the International Court of Justice, for instance, in this case, is the only, so to say, filter mechanism that can filter out what are the facts in this matter and what are potential violations, and to put a legal assessment on the facts. So that's why it's so important to have the ICJ, and states should still support the ICJ in terms of its independence and impartiality.
Thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate the time. Dr. Atilla Kisla is the International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Centre. Really appreciate the time.